Until recently, you could make the argument that Game of Thrones was a stealthily feminist show. In its early years it might have lured in the typical male fantasy crowd with sex, violence and alpha male characters like Ned and Robb Stark, Robert Baratheon and Jaime Lannister, but before you knew it a woman was on the Iron Throne. Her main challenger was also a woman, and Westeros was stuffed full of female assassins, knights, wily politicos and Dame Diana Rigg. Sure, the show still asked us to ogle naked female bodies once a week, and there was still a worryingly relaxed attitude to rape, but we fantasy-loving female viewers have learned to take our victories where we can, and Game of Thrones was one of them. Which is why it's so frustrating to see the show slip back into its old ways in this final season. Coming off the back of the Long Night's excellent twist ending, where Arya, rather than the expected hero Jon Snow, killed the Night King, the latest episode is especially disappointing. So many of the show's strongest female characters were undermined by showrunners David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, who also wrote this episode. First, a caveat: personally, I'm thoroughly enjoying Daenerys' descent into complete megalomania. Anyone who thinks it's an unbelievable character shift for her weren't paying attention during her 7 straight seasons of setting people who don't agree with her on fire. Daenerys was never going to be the right person for the Iron Throne, and neither is Cersei, who also has a history of blowing up her enemies. Heck, if they weren't fighting over the Iron Throne, the two of them would probably get on like a sept on fire. So having 2 female villains is not at all anti-feminist. In fact, it's refreshing, but it gets wearisome when, in The Last of the Starks, Tyrion and Varys all but decide that Jon Snow is the rightful king to oppose these mad queens, chiefly because he's a man. Sure, he hasn't resorted to solving his problems with explosions, which is certainly a tick in the plus column, but he's also a notoriously terrible politician, and last time he was put in charge of something he got murdered in a mutiny. None of his major battles were won by him. Sansa bailed him out in the Battle of the Bastards, and Arya saved the day in the Battle for Winterfell. Jon's only qualifications for the throne are that he's a Targaryen, and a bloke. To hear Tyrion and Varys, characters who have always been portrayed as egalitarian, say that Jon's gender would make him a better leader than Daenerys is just depressing. And to see Daenerys being rejected as a potential queen for being too strong for a husband to control, not to mention being portrayed as emotionally unstable when a man in her position would be depicted simply as a bit of a dick, is a betrayal of the character. But that storyline, at least, can be justified by the historical context. Kings held more weight than queens in the medieval period that Game of Thrones is loosely referencing. Elsewhere in the episode, female characters were dealt much more egregious wrongs. A mere 2 weeks after her triumphant knighting, Brienne ended the episode wailing over a man while wearing a nightgown, one of the only times we've seen her out of her armor.